Okay, so I really hate to start this video off on a bad foot, but I do think I have found the single most questionable decision that Paizo made in the Starfinder 2e playtest. You see, one of the new ancestries, the Barathu, have a very interesting 5th level ancestry feat. Vent gas is a 5th level ancestry feat usable once per hour. You vent gas from sacs inside your body to propel you forward. The area you currently occupy plus all squares in a 5-foot emanation become filled with your vented gas. All creatures in the gas become concealed, and all creatures outside the gas become concealed to creatures within it. The gas disperses at the beginning of your next turn. You gain a plus 10-foot circumstance bonus to all of your speeds. Then, you either stride or fly. At the end of your turn, your gas reserves are depleted, and the bonus to your speeds ends. Now, yes, I do think this is a fun and interesting ability, but Paizo, I think we all know that the TTRPG player base has the collective maturity of a middle school classroom, which means you have just ensured an unrelenting number of fart jokes in and around Starfinder 2e tables, and yes, this is probably going to be the most popular feat that the Barathu have. Today, we're going to continue our discussion of the new Ancestries and Versatile Heritages that can be found in the Starfinder 2e playtest on today's episode of The Local Disaster Tour Guide. Hello travelers and tourists, my name is Mark and I am the local disaster tour guide. That's right, I'm a storyteller that recently noticed that the new Prismeni Versatile Heritage comes with a first level ancestry feat option called Data Jockey that allows them to cast the spell Implant Data as a divine cantrip at will. Now, Implant Data is a pretty simple cantrip. Basically, it just means that you target a computer or technological device, and then you determine what the first thing the next person who logs into that device will see as soon as they log in. So I'm just curious, what is the Starfinder 2 equivalent of the Rickroll? Welcome to a journey through the fantastic world of TTRPGs like Pathfinder and Starfinder, and welcome back to my coverage of the Starfinder 2e playtest. In particular, this is the third video in a series covering the new Ancestry and Versatile Heritage options that can be found in the Starfinder 2e playtest. There are 2 previous videos in this series which are linked in the video description. In the first video in the series, we talked about the Androids, Humans, Ysoki, and Borai Versatile Heritage. In the second video in this series, we talked about the Vesk, Skittermanders, Pahtra, and the Sirren, which leaves just 4 more options that we'll be covering in today's video, which are the Barathu, the Lashunta, the Kasathas, and the new Prismeni Versatile Heritage. In this video, we're going to talk about what the Ancestries are and what kind of characters they support. We'll take a look at the traits that the Ancestries come with, as well as the first level Ancestry feats, so we get an idea of what builds these different Ancestries might support. And we're going to examine what kind of stories and characters that these Ancestries support inside of Starfinder 2nd Edition. Now, obviously, these are playtest rules, and right now Starfinder 2nd Edition is going through a playtest process. The link to the playtest document, which can be downloaded for free from Paizo, can be found in the video description, and Paizo would love to have your feedback on all of the aspects of the playtest that they have released to the public. So if you and your gaming table are interested in contributing to the success of Starfinder 2nd Edition, I strongly recommend checking out the Starfinder 2e playtest, playing a couple of sessions, and giving Paizo feedback with some of your thoughts. Of course, you can also support this channel by doing all of the stuff that helps to feed the algorithm. If you enjoy this content, please remember to like, share, and subscribe. You can also check out my free Discord and my Patreon. Links to those can be found in the video description. But far and away, the best thing you can do to help support this channel is join in the conversation. So feel free to jump down to the comments section and let me know what your thoughts are on the ancestries and heritages that we are discussing in the video today. Now, I will say before we dive into any specifics that there are some general discussions on ancestries in Starfinder 2e, especially things like starting languages for ancestries. You can see some of that general conversation in the first video in this series, and I didn't want to repeat those topics every single time we did a video in the series. So if you're interested in that larger conversation, you can find that in the first video, but with all that out of the way, let's get started. The first ancestry that we're going to discuss today is probably the strangest ancestry in the Starfinder 2e playtest, but in a way that's kind of its selling point. That is the Barathu. Barathu are floating jellyfish-like beings that evolved on the gas giant Bertheta. Barathus rewrite their own genetic code instinctively and at will, shaping their bodies into a stunning array of unique forms. Yes, that's right, Paizo has finally given you the opportunity to check floating telepathic teenager jellyfish off of your player character wishlist. Now, I'm aware of the fact that in a way, this particular ancestry is a little bit out there, but again, I think this is part of the selling point of the Barathu. And as Starfinder 2e develops, I think we will see other very interesting and unusual ancestry concepts presented throughout the course of this game. But I do think that's actually one of the important things that Paizo needs to keep in mind as they develop Starfinder 2nd Edition. As a science fiction, science fantasy, or space opera type game, one of the selling points of this style of game is the very alien creatures that can be encountered and potentially portrayed through the game. And I think Barathu are a fantastic first offering to fill this particular story niche for Starfinder 2nd Edition. Looking at the basic abilities of the Barathu, they are medium-sized creatures with 8 hit points, and here in the playtest document they have a listed speed of 25 feet with a fly speed of 20 feet. I believe that first speed is supposed to be 5 feet, not 25 feet, and you'll see why I say that here in a minute. I think that is a misprint. But one thing we know for sure is that the fly speed for the Barathu is kind of intended to be one of the main selling points of the ancestry. As for attribute boosts and flaws, they come with recommended boosts to Constitution, Wisdom, and they have a free boost, along with a recommended flaw to Dexterity. And for starting languages, they have Common, Berthetan, and then additional languages equal to their intelligence modifier. Finally, they have the traits Aberration and Barathu. And Goat King from Goat King Dice, if you're watching this video, I think we finally found the line where Paizo will stop slapping the humanoid trait on anything and everything that they publish. Past that, Barathu are going to come with 2 abilities. The first one is called Genetic Adaptation, and this one reads, you can reshape and adjust your body to adapt to new situations. You can retrain an ancestry feat in 1 day of downtime rather than in 1 week, and it notes, you can retrain any ancestry feat, even lineage feats. The next ability that is listed is called Limited Telepathy, which says, you can communicate mentally with creatures within 30 feet. You can communicate only with creatures that share a language with you. This doesn't give you any access to their thoughts, and it communicates no more information than normal speech would. Now, in regards to these 2 abilities, first I want to talk about Limited Telepathy because we actually saw this on the Sirren in the previous video. One of the things that Paizo was very liberal with in Starfinder 1st Edition was handing out telepathy to just all kinds of different characters, and in a fantasy RPG that's a little bit of a strange thing to have as a commonplace ability, but in a sci-fi setting it's not actually that disruptive. The ubiquitous presence of comm units makes quick and reliable communication a pretty normal feature of a futuristic setting, which means that abilities like telepathy are honestly not very disruptive to the normal assumptions of the game. And one of the things that Paizo did a lot in 1st edition is they just gave out telepathy a lot of different ways, because honestly, it didn't disrupt the game then, and you can kind of tell that they have a similar attitude in Starfinder 2nd Edition of allowing telepathy, at least limited telepathy, to be a fairly common ability. We talked about that with the Sirren in the previous video, we see it here with the Barathu, and I'll go ahead and tell you we're not done seeing this ability in this series, because like I said, Paizo passes this out a lot. However, the Barathu have another interesting ability here, which is genetic adaptation, allowing the Barathu to retrain ancestry feats, including lineage feats. Now, it is worth noting that most Barathu will only have access to lineage feats if they take a versatile heritage that gives them access to lineage feats, but the ability to retrain ancestry feats is a little bit unique. It's not completely impossible in Pathfinder or Starfinder 2e, but it is a relatively rare option that characters can take advantage of. However, in my conversations about Pathfinder 2e, I have said one of the low-key strengths of the system is the fact that retraining is intended to be a core part of the game. I think that is a very intelligent design decision that Paizo made up front. I think it provides a lot of strength to Pathfinder 2e, and I think it will do the same for Starfinder 2e as well. And you can see here that with the Barathu, they are actually incentivizing you to retrain frequently, in this instance by giving the Barathu the ability to very quickly retrain ancestry feats. It's a little bit of a niche case ability, but it's a very interesting ability and something that I like. Now going further into the Barathu write-up, you'll see things like a physical description, things that might be true about your Barathu or things that other people probably think about your character, a discussion of Barathu society along with some sample names to help you come up with a realistic name for your character. You can see a discussion of Barathu beliefs, including popular edicts and anathema. However, the next portion of the write-up for the Barathu that has some mechanical implications are the Barathu Heritages, and the Barathu are going to come with 4 possible heritages. These are Dreamer, Early Stage, Manufacturer, and Merged. So let's talk about them. Up first, we have the Dreamer Barathu. You have communed with the cosmic melody of Liavara and it changed you. You struggle to express the fragments of memory and sensation you recall from the experience, except through singing and other similar psychic emanations. Choose one cantrip from the occult spell list. By weaving magic into your song, you can cast this spell as an occult innate spell at will. A cantrip is heightened to a spell rank equal to half your level, rounded up. Your magic is adaptable. You can channel your music to enhance it. Once per day, you can meditate on your cosmic song to change the cantrip you have chosen to a different cantrip from the occult spell list. This is a 10-minute activity that has the concentrate trait. So the Dreamer Barathu Heritage is your classic gain a cantrip option. In this case, it's going to allow you to gain an occult cantrip, but one of the things we've seen a few times in the Starfinder 2e playtest is a lot of these pick a cantrip abilities have some sort of designation for how you can switch the cantrip out if you decide to do so. And in this case, you can spend 10 minutes singing in order to switch out your cantrip 1 per day. I think this is pretty fun. Next up, we have the Early Stage Barathu. You are young and inexperienced compared to other Barathus, with an individualistic worldview likely shaped by your interactions with other cultures. You've yet to see the full breadth of the cosmos and haven't adapted yourself to overcome its many threats or understand its various life forms. Your form is highly mutable as you haven't chosen to specialize or merge with other Barathus. You're small instead of medium. You gain Quick Squeeze as a bonus feat. Additionally, you gain resistance to precision damage equal to half your level, minimum 1. So this is what I was teasing a few moments ago when I mentioned the idea of playing a teenage Barathu. The Early Stage Barathu, which if I remember correctly was kind of the assumed version of the Barathu in Starfinder 1st Edition, the Early Stage Barathu is essentially the teenage Barathu who is leaving home and going and doing stuff, and they don't really have the experiences to understand all the trouble that they could potentially get into, but that's part of what's motivating them to go out. In Starfinder 2e, when you go with this option, it's going to reduce your size from medium to small. It's going to give you Quick Squeeze as a bonus feat, which honestly I feel like doesn't come up very often. but might be a little more practical inside the tight confines of a spaceship. I'm not sure on that one. However, I think the main selling point of this heritage is the resistance to precision damage. I've seen precision damage be pretty brutal in Pathfinder 2e, and so I think the ability to resist precision damage is something that's going to be appealing to a lot of characters. Up next, we have the Manufacturer Heritage for the Barathu. Your body is a living laboratory, allowing you to ingest raw materials and refine them into useful medicines and other products. You become trained in crafting, or another skill if you're already trained in crafting, and gain the Pharmaceutical Crafting Feat. This one's pretty simple, but it introduces one of the mechanical niches that they've designed for the Barathu, which is the idea of Barathu having the ability to use their body in order to craft medicines. The Manufacturer Barathu Heritage is specifically designed for this storytelling niche. Finally, we have the Merged Barathu Heritage. You're a unique entity formed from the constant union of two or more Barathus who enjoy the act of combination so much that they chose not to return to isolation as their former selves. You are large instead of medium, you gain 10 hit points from your ancestry instead of 8, and you gain a +1 circumstance bonus on saving throws against emotion effects. You're large size, you're tougher, and you're never lonely. Honestly, I feel like there's some interesting storytelling potential there. Looking at the heritages in general for the Barathu, I like these, though I do wish that Paizo had maybe included one or two more. Two of the heritages primarily feel like a way to adjust the starting size of your character. I totally get why these are inclusions, but that means that when you look at the remaining normal size Barathu heritages, you only have two. And while I like both of them, neither of them seem especially unique in terms of the mechanical benefits, so ultimately the Barathu heritages are fun but not especially enticing to me. I can see the utility in all of them. I think all of them are useful and worth picking in certain scenarios, but I wish Paizo had done a little bit more with the Barathu heritages. Now let's go ahead and take a look at some of the Barathu first level ancestry feats to get an idea for some of the things that you can do with your Barathu character. Up first, we have the feat Adaptable Limbs. You grow sturdy lower limbs that allow you to walk on land. Increase your speed to 20 feet. Remember earlier I mentioned that there was probably a mistype in the speed line? This is why. Increase your speed to 20 feet. Additionally, you gain the Adaptive Locomotion action. Adaptive Locomotion is a one-action activity with the Barathu and Morph traits, frequency 1 per hour. Effect: you transform your limbs into either flippers or hooked pseudopods to better traverse the surrounding environment. If you select flippers, you gain a swim speed of 20 feet. If you select hooked pseudopods, you gain a climb speed of 20 feet. This transformation lasts for 10 minutes. So essentially, Adaptable Limbs is the mobility option for the Barathu. Most of the time you're going to be relying on the fly speed, which, as I mentioned, is kind of the main selling point of this ancestry. But the Adaptable Limbs feat exists for those scenarios where your fly speed is either not ideal or not available for one reason or another. So while it's a little bit niche, I do see the utility of it. Next up, we have Barathu Lore. It's pretty standard for Ancestry to have a quote-unquote lore feat, and Barathu get one as well. This one is going to give you trained proficiency in crafting and medicine, and you will gain the additional lore general feat for Barathu Lore. This is structured exactly like we're used to seeing, not much of a surprise here. Next up, we have Dermal Spikes. Spiky protrusions jut from your body, which you can use to wound your attackers. Your Fortitude DC against athletics checks to grapple or shove increases by 1, and additionally you gain the Piercing Spikes reaction. Piercing Spikes is a reaction with the trigger, you become grabbed by a creature. Effect: you twist and thrash your body around, dealing 1d4 plus your strength modifier piercing damage to the triggering creature. This damage increases by 1d4 at 5th level and every 4 levels thereafter. Basically, you have spines that you can use to defend yourself if someone's trying to grab you, and given how popular the wrestler archetype from Pathfinder 2e has proven, there's probably a solid case to make for Dermal Spikes being useful. Up next, we have Grasping Tendrils. You've adapted more of your tendrils and limbs with complex musculature and cellular structure, improving articulation and fine motor skills. Increase your number of arms by 2. At any time, one pair of your hands is designated as active hands. You can change this designation from one pair of hands to another by taking the Switch Active Hands action, which is a single action. You can only perform actions with your active hands, and for more information on playing characters with more than 2 hands, you can see a sidebar found on page 172 of the playtest, and this feat is a feat that you can take multiple times. We saw a similar ability with the Skittermanders in the previous video, and there's another ancestry in this video that's also going to have multiple arms as an option. But it is notable that with the Barathu, you can literally just grow extra arms every so often as you level up. Next up, we have Metabolic Manipulation. Through careful experimentation and selective adaptation, you've manipulated your immune system and internal chemistry, enabling you to better fight off illness and infection. You gain the Fast Recovery skill feat and the Targeted Immunization action. Targeted Immunization is a free action with the Concentrate trait. Trigger, you recover from a disease or poison. Effect, you instinctively synthesize antigens that make you immune to the triggering disease or poison. This immunity lasts for the next day or until you next use Targeted Immunization. Now, I'm going to be honest, I don't know how often this will come up inside of a Starfinder 2e game, but this is actually one of my favorite Barathu abilities from a storytelling perspective. This is very unique and very interesting to me. If you fight off a disease or a poison, you can actually make yourself immune to that disease or poison for the rest of the day. Now, if you're fighting against a particular enemy or creature that uses disease or poison, this could be incredibly useful, especially if you have multiple encounters against that type of creature. But outside of those types of encounters, I don't think this will come up very often. Still, I think this is a very unique ability that actually sells what the Barathu are and what the Barathu can do. So even if this is not necessarily the strongest choice, this is one of my favorite choices from the Ancestry feats because, like I said, it feels very unique to the Barathu and really sells the Ancestry. Along with that, we also have Synthesized Medicinal, which has the prerequisite of the Manufacturer Barathu Heritage that we discussed earlier. This is a 2-action activity with a frequency of once per day. You can synthesize beneficial remedies with your own body and immediately digest them. You create one elixir, potion, or serum that you know the formula for with a level equal to your level or lower. You don't pay any cost to create this item. You immediately consume and digest this item, activating it as a free action that has the Concentrate trait rather than its usual activation method. So this feat is basically once per day, create and drink a healing elixir or other beneficial item that your character needs. The utility on this feat is just bonkers. If you're the kind of player who's willing to go around and collect formulas and make sure that your character knows how to craft items, this is going to be incredibly useful, and you're going to get a ton of mileage out of this. Between Synthesized Medicinal and Metabolic Manipulation, both of these I think are on-brand thematic choices for the Barathu, but I do think Synthesized Medicinal will see a lot more utility in a standard campaign, so this is probably the stronger feat, and still has a lot of just thematic selling power, so I really enjoy this one as well. I think the flavor is a bit better on Metabolic Manipulation, but both of these are very strong choices, and I really like them. Finally, in terms of first level Ancestry feat options, we have Tentacle Whip. You grow a tentacle that can lash out like a whip. You gain a tentacle unarmed attack that deals 1d6 bludgeoning damage. Your tentacle is in the Brawling Weapon group and has the Barathu, Finesse, Reach, and Unarmed traits. So this is one of your classic Ancestry feats that gives you access to an unarmed attack. In this case, a Tentacle Whip, but I do like the fact that this is an option that comes with the Reach trait. You don't often see the Reach trait on feats like this, so that is pretty unique. If you're interested in some of the higher level Barathu feat options, feel free to pause the video and take a quick glance at this page. This isn't all of them, but you might see some things that are interesting to you. But let's go ahead and jump to the next Ancestry for today's video, which is the Kasatha. Now I'll go ahead and say, the Kasatha have a very interesting story inside of the Starfinder setting. This is an Ancestry that, back before the gap, knew that the star that their homeworld was orbiting, they knew that that star was dying, so they set out on a great world ship known as the Idari, headed for a planet that, as far as they could tell, was completely uninhabited. The gap hit, their journey continued, and after the gap was over, they arrived in the Pact World system, only to find out that their destination planet of Akaton was in fact already inhabited, causing a little bit of a what do we do now moment for the entire culture. They ended up just kind of parking their world ship in orbit inside of the system, and now the Kasathas are part of the Pact Worlds and are trying to determine their place among their new allies. The Kasatha Ancestry is described as follows. Steeped in the ancient traditions of a distant homeworld orbiting a dying star, Kasathas are four-armed humanoids who arrived in the Pact Worlds aboard a massive world ship named Idari. Striving for cosmic balance in all things, Kasathas take pride in tempering their technological advances with the wisdom of their ancestors. In terms of their starting traits, Kasatha are medium-sized with a base speed of 25 feet. They come with 8 bonus hit points, and for boosts and flaws, their recommended attribute boosts are Strength, Wisdom, and a free boost, along with a flaw to Charisma. As for starting languages, they get Common, Kasatha, and 1 regional language of your choice, with additional languages equal to your intelligence modifier. Their traits are Humanoid and Kasatha, and they come with the 4-armed trait. We've seen this before with Skittermanders, and we discussed this a little bit with the Barathu feat that we saw a moment ago, but I'll read this really quick. You have 4 arms, which allows you to wield and hold up to 4 hands worth of weapons and equipment. At any time, 1 pair of hands is designated as your active hands. You can change this designation from 1 pair of hands to another by taking the Switch Active Hands action. You can only perform actions with your active hands, and as I mentioned before, there is additional information found on page 172 of the playtest. Moving ahead, we get the ancestry description that we're accustomed to seeing. You have a physical description, a discussion of their society, and some of the naming conventions that would be associated with the Kasathas. You get a discussion of their beliefs, including popular edicts and anathema. And you will notice as you read up on the Kasatha that you will hear lots of terms like balance and harmony and tradition. Kasatha feel like Starfinder's answer to the traditional sci-fi concept of the wise ancients style of people. I think that's the niche that Paizo was really going for with this particular ancestry. Moving back to the mechanical side of the Kasatha, let's go ahead and talk about their heritage options. There are 5 heritage options available for the Kasatha, which are Akatonian, Kasath Survivalist, Shipborne, Stellar Nomad, and Tempering. Let's take a look at what each of these mean. First up is Akatonian. You, or one of your ancestors, traveled to the Pact Worlds on the Idari and settled on Akaton. Akaton's significantly lower gravity grants you an advantage in the fun and practical art of leaping, and you likely revel in the many rituals surrounding the desert world's popular sports. You gain the quick jump feat, and you don't treat sand as uneven ground. It's a little bit strange to me that the Akatonian heritage for the Kasatha doesn't include training in the athletics or acrobatic skill. That feels like it would be appropriate here. It might be a balance thing, but other than that, this is fairly interesting. Next up, we have the Kasath Survivalist. You and your ancestors were among those who chose not to abandon your dying homeworld. Your people trekked through wasted lands under dim skies, seeking shelter and resources even as they slowly dwindle. You may have finally decided to seek a better life, or perhaps you hope to convince others to return to Kasath with you. You can hustle twice as long while exploring before you have to stop. If you're in a group that is hustling, you increase the total number of minutes the group can hustle by 10 minutes or 20 minutes if you're 13th level or higher, and you gain the Feather Step feat. Now narratively, I really like this one. The Kasatha are already a little bit of outsiders for the Pact Worlds. They're obviously allied with the Pact Worlds, but their position in the Pact Worlds is a little bit strange. And here you have a Kasatha heritage where you're an outsider even for kind of the main group of Kasathas, because you're among those who actually stayed on your homeworld for a period of time. I really like the narrative potential here, but I will be honest, I'm not sure if the mechanics on this one really sell me. Hustling feels like one of those options that almost never comes up in actual play. I realize the potential benefit here, but honestly, I don't know if you'll ever actually see this benefit in an actual game. The Featherstep feat can be useful, so Kasatha Survivalist is not a complete loss to me, but the narrative side of this heritage is a lot stronger than the mechanical side, at least in my opinion. Next up, we have the Shipborne Kasatha. You are one of the Kasathas born and raised on the Adari generation ship that now orbits the Pact World Sun. Your family kept hope and tradition alive while enduring the hardships of lengthy space travel. For you, the Adari is the only home you've ever known. When you roll a success on a saving throw against an emotion effect, you get a critical success instead. Now, this one I know what they're going for. I feel like they could have sold it a little better. One of the elements of Kasatha culture is the idea that so many of them were crammed inside of this world ship that their culture has just kind of adapted to the idea of being in a very tight space with a lot of other people. And I feel like that's what the shipborne heritage is intended to display. You're used to being around a lot of people, so you're used to managing your emotions. I think that fits mechanically. I wish they'd written it up a little bit better, but I think this kind of sells that idea pretty well. Moving on to the next one, we have Stellar Nomad. You choose to travel abroad, leaving your birthplace to embark on a journey through the wider cosmos. During your daily preparations, you can study a particular faction, philosophy, ancestry, or religion to learn one of their edicts or anathema, and gain a broader understanding of that culture's customs and traditions. While you follow that edict or anathema, you become trained in the associated lore, such as Vesk lore or Demoratosh lore. This proficiency lasts until you prepare again. Since this training is temporary, you can't use it as a prerequisite for a permanent character option like a feat or a skill increase. Now, I've seen some people actually jumping on this one a little bit, but I actually like this heritage a lot. One of the ideas behind the Kasatha is because their position is a little bit strange, a lot of them like to travel out and experience other cultures and experience the universe at large to help them better understand their place in the universe, and the Stellar Nomad very clearly represents that. Mechanically, during your daily preparations, you can study a particular faction, learn one of their edicts or anathema, adopt that particular edict or anathema, and so long as you are following it, gain training in the associated lore. Now, a lot of people do not like this feat because essentially what you have to do is gain an extra edict or anathema in order to gain an extra trained lore, but I want to remind you, this is a trained lore that you can train into and out of on a daily basis to fit the needs of your campaign, and that is incredibly powerful. One thing worth noting is, Game Masters are encouraged to lower the DC of Recall Knowledge skill checks if you are using a lore skill that is tailored to the particular question at hand. Well, Stellar Nomad is basically a Kasatha heritage that says you will always have an appropriate Recall Knowledge lore skill available because every single day you pick which skill you want to be trained in. Yes, the extra edict and anathema could be a little bit frustrating, but honestly I think this is pretty powerful, and the flexibility of this heritage is really, really good. I like this one. The last Kasatha heritage is called the Tempering Heritage, and I find this one a little bit disappointing. It reads, "You're undergoing your tempering, a coming-of-age ritual in which a Kasatha rejects the formal traditions of their family and experiences other customs and traditions. You may be one of the untempered, a Kasatha who chooses to continue their tempering beyond the traditional year-long period. You become trained in society and gain the Streetwise feat." Narratively, the tempering is a pretty big deal for the Kasatha, and I do like the idea that there's an option that leans into the tempering, but I kind of feel like the Stellar Nomad is a better reflection of the tempering than the actual benefit of the tempering heritage here. I get why training in society and the Streetwise feat would be nice to have, but honestly, the adaptable nature of the Stellar Nomad heritage feels a lot more appropriate for what the tempering is. So ultimately, I'm not a big fan of this heritage because I feel like a different heritage just sells the concept better. Overall, I feel like most of the Kasatha Heritages are decent, at least from a narrative perspective. But with both the Kasatha Survivalist and the Tempering Heritage, I do have some questions about the mechanical benefits of them. I'm not as crazy about the mechanical side of those abilities, but the storytelling of the Kasatha Heritages are all pretty good, so I will at least give them credit for that. Now let's go ahead and talk about the first level Kasatha Ancestry feats. First up we have Calm Before the Storm. You maintain a calm demeanor even when you are facing mortal peril. At the end of your turn, reduce your frightened condition by 2 instead of 1. This is pretty simple and straightforward, and mechanically I don't know if it's going to come up super often. I've seen Frightened 2 happen, but it feels like Frightened 2 doesn't happen to player characters very often. I could be wrong about that, but that's just what I've seen at my table. Still, the ability to overcome the frightened condition twice as fast as somebody else, that's not a bad ability, so I do like it. Up next we have the feat Crew Member, which is a reaction. It triggers when an ally within 30 feet attempts an aid check and rolls a failure. The effect is, you're always able to help in a pinch. Attempt a skill check or attack roll of the same type attempted by your ally, and replace the result of the failed aid with your result, even if you did not prepare to help. So basically this is a reaction that lets you jump in and help when somebody else on your team is trying to help and not necessarily doing a good job. Insert your own joke about the Skittermanders here. Then we have Kasatha Lore, which is going to be the Ancestry Lore feat for the Kasatha. It's going to give you training in Diplomacy and Society, and it's going to give you the additional Lore General feat for Kasatha Lore. Next up we have Kasathan Weapon Familiarity. We haven't seen one of these feats yet in this video, but Weapon Familiarity is a style of Ancestry feat that is pretty common in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, and we've seen it a few times in the Starfinder 2e playtest so far. So that phrase, Weapon Familiarity, that kind of sets exactly what this feat is going to do. Going ahead and reading through the feat, your people have instilled in you a respect for melee combat, and you've trained to wield a few more elegant examples in battle. You gain access to all uncommon weapons with the Kasatha trait. You have familiarity with weapons with the Kasatha trait, plus the Dueling Sword, Plasma Sword, Shock Truncheon, and Singing Spear. For purposes of proficiency, you treat any of these that are martial weapons as simple weapons, and any that are advanced weapons as martial weapons. At 5th level, whenever you get a critical hit with one of these weapons, you get its critical specialization effect. We don't have time to go into the specific weapons mentioned here, but as I said, this is a style of feat we've seen many times before in this series. Essentially, this is a style of feat that allows you to improve your access to weapons and what types of weapons that your character might be able to use. The exact niche application is going to change from Ancestry to Ancestry, but there's always going to be some welcome options here. Next up, we have the Loping Stride feat. This one is incredibly simple. You have endured difficult land journeys and move with an impressive pace. Your speed increases by 5 feet. As we've noted before in the series, movement speed is pretty powerful in this system, so the ability to move faster is pretty nice to have. And then the last first level Ancestry feat option for the Kasatha is called Natural Grace. This is a free action once per day with the Fortune trait, and the trigger is you fail an acrobatics check or reflex saving throw. You have almost supernatural control of your movements, which can sometimes save you in dangerous situations. You can re-roll the triggering skill check or saving throw using the second result, even if it's worse. Anyone who has gamed for any serious length of time knows how dangerous a failed save against a fireball can be, so this is probably an option that's worth keeping your eye on. We don't have time to go into all of the Ancestry feats for the Kasatha, but here's a quick glance at some of the options that you might have access to, so feel free to pause the video and read over them if you want. But with that, we're going to move on to the last full Ancestry in this video and talk about the Lashunta. Lashuntas evolved psychic abilities and a unique dimorphism that help them survive on their home world of Castrovel. Lashuntas manipulate their own genetics at puberty, allowing each individual to develop into an enhanced scholar or warrior, though not every Lashunta commits to these traditional choices. Now before we get into particular traits, I do want to point out this is the second Ancestry today that makes mention of manipulating their own genetics. Now, for the Lashunta, this essentially is going to boil down to a first level choice that your character makes, and once you make that choice, it's set. So the Lashunta don't manipulate their genetics to the same extreme degree that the Barathu do, but I think it's very interesting that Paizo has given us two different ancestries in the core rules that come with this idea of playing with your own genetic code. I think that opens some pretty interesting story ideas, so I just wanted to point out that, hey, this is the second time we've seen that show up. Now, taking a look at the specific Lashunta abilities, the Lashunta are medium size with a base speed of 25 feet, and they come with 6 bonus hit points. They have recommended attribute boosts of a charisma boost and a free boost with no recommended attribute flaws, although we will talk about that more here in a moment. Then, for starting languages, you have Common and Castravelian with additional languages equal to your intelligence modifier, and then their starting traits are Humanoid and Lashunta with the ability Limited Telepathy. The Limited Telepathy here is going to work just like the Limited Telepathy we saw in the Barathu earlier, so there's no need to have that conversation again, but as I noted, Paizo passes out Limited Telepathy a lot in this game, and here's another example of that. Scrolling down, we have the Ancestry description page that we're used to seeing. Physical description, society, sample names, beliefs, edicts, anathema, all of those things that we're used to. Let's skip ahead to the Lashunta Heritages, which will ultimately present us with 3 options: the Damaya Lashunta, the Karasha Lashunta, and the Unbound Lashunta. Now, if you were to go all the way back to Starfinder 1st Edition and even Pathfinder and Pathfinder lore, you would know that the story behind Damaya and Karasha has evolved a bit throughout Paizo's writing. Essentially, the Damaya and Karasha are choices that have been available for the Lashunta for a long time, and Paizo in Starfinder 2nd Edition has brought these options forward, but has also included an Unbound option for Lashuntas who might not want to fit in either of these two categories. But functionally, this is going to give us 3 heritages for the Lashunta, so let's go ahead and take a look at them. First up, you have the Damaya Lashunta. You've chosen the adaptive genetics that lead to becoming a Damaya. You may be taller than other Lashunta and are likely encouraged to pursue work as a scholar or politician. You gain an attribute boost to intelligence and an attribute flaw to constitution, but your free ancestry boost cannot also be to intelligence. So remember earlier you had charisma and a free boost? The Damaya and Karasha are both going to modify your boosts and flaws. That's what kind of makes Lashunta a little bit confusing as an ancestry. So for the Damaya, what this is saying is your actual ancestry attribute boosts are going to be charisma and intelligence with a free boost, and then you will also have a flaw to constitution. You gain trained proficiency in diplomacy, and you also gain the additional lore feat, which, as far as I can tell here, is intended to be you just get to pick which feat the additional lore feat is going to cover. That's pretty awesome. Clearly, the Damaya Lashunta are intended to be more scholarly, probably intended to lean more towards spellcaster types of characters. If you like playing the party sage, the Damaya is a fantastic choice for that. On the flip side, you have the Karasha Lashunta. You've chosen the adaptive genetics that lead to becoming a Karasha. You may be shorter than other Lashuntas and would likely excel as a warrior or explorer. You gain an attribute boost to strength and an attribute flaw to wisdom, but the free ancestry boost cannot also be to strength. You gain 8 hit points from your ancestry instead of 6, and you gain a +1 circumstance bonus to athletics to shove or trip foes. So for this particular heritage, when you look at attribute boosts and flaws, you're going to have a boost to strength and charisma with a free boost and then a flaw to wisdom. You're going to increase your ancestry hit points from 6 to 8, and you're going to gain a +1 circumstance bonus on shove or trip. Something tells me I'm going to see a lot of Swing Ripper videos in the future where he's building Karasha Lashunta that go into the wrestler archetype. I just feel like that's coming. Finally, we have the Unbound Lashunta. You've decided against activating your ancestry's adaptive genetics, and you might show a combination of Damaya and Karasha traits. You may be tall and muscular, small and lithe, or have unusual features such as bumps, swirls covering your entire body, or long fuzzy antenna. and in particular, you're going to gain the Unbound Mind reaction. Now, before we talk about Unbound Mind, stepping back a bit, this means your Ancestry boost just stay at that original boost to Charisma and free boost with no flaws. That's what the Unbound Lashunta is going to look like automatically. And then they have the Unbound Mind reaction. The trigger is, you attempt a saving throw against a mental effect, but you haven't rolled yet. The effect is, you refuse to conform to the will of others, shaking off their attempts to control you with sheer determination. You gain a +1 circumstance bonus to saving throws on the triggering save and other saves against mental effects until the start of your next turn. So this is basically a reaction that is always available that is going to make you a lot harder to hit with mental effects. Not bad. Okay, so talking about the Lashunta Heritages in general, I'm going to admit I am a little bit conflicted in that I understand the storytelling hook that Paizo is trying to include here, and I don't fault them for including this hook. Like I said, there is a lot of storytelling weight behind Damaya and Karasha in the way the Lashunta have been presented throughout Paizo's writing, and I understand what Paizo is doing here. My main issue is, in leaning into this story arc and in leaning into this choice, Paizo is effectively locking Lashunta characters into one of 3 options. And if you remember my commentary on the humans in the first video in the series, I'm actually very frustrated with humans in Pathfinder 2e because they only have 3 heritages. It makes the humans feel very boring to me and makes it one of my least favorite ancestries in Pathfinder 2e, and I feel like Paizo's kind of locked the Lashunta into the same place by leaning so hard into the Damaya, Karasha, or Unbound choice. I don't mind that these options are here, but I do wish that Paizo had given us a little bit more for the Lashunta, because it just feels very constricted to me. Next up, we'll take a look at the Lashunta First Level Ancestry feat options, starting with Alluring Pheromones. You can leverage your alluring pheromones to influence others, even when you lack other means of communication. You can use diplomacy to make an impression on creatures with whom you don't share a language and to make simple requests of them. This could include getting directions or getting the target to pick a specific individual out from a crowd. When you do, make an impression and request lose the linguistic trait and gain the olfactory trait. I actually really like this feat. I don't think it's super powerful, but I do think it sells some of the concepts associated with the Lashunta pretty well. And I don't know why, but I feel like it's a pretty common sci-fi trope to have at least one set of aliens that have weird pheromone-based powers, so the Lashunta seem to be filling that niche for Paizo. Essentially, this is just going to modify your diplomacy skill, but as the Lashunta are typically going to have a boost to Charisma, they're probably going to be decent at diplomacy, and modifying when and how you can use diplomacy is going to have its use cases, so narratively and mechanically I do like this feat, even if I don't know if it's going to see a ton of use. Next up we have the feat Canny Explorer. This has the prerequisite that you're trained in nature or survival. You're accustomed to surviving natural hazards and confrontations with aggressive predators. Those of you who are familiar with Castrovel, that sentence is amazing. And if for some reason you're not familiar with Castrovel, oh, let me sell you on a fun tourist destination. You gain a +1 circumstance bonus to nature checks to command an animal, to perception checks to detect environmental hazards, and to survival checks to disable environmental hazards. If you have another ability that allows you to do so, you gain a +1 circumstance bonus to diplomacy checks to make an impression on animals and to make a request on animals. All of these abilities under Canny Explorer are very niche, but in the right niche, in the right circumstances, all of these abilities can be useful. I did a series on storytelling in Pathfinder 2e a while back, and I did some videos on the rules covering hazards. Some of these bonuses to detecting and disarming hazards could come in very clutch in the right moments. So don't get me wrong, I feel like Canny Explorer has its use case scenarios, but at the end of the day, I don't know if this is the strongest feat because the prevalence of creatures and hazards really is going to determine if you can get the mileage out of this feat. Next up, we have the feat Center Thoughts. This is a free action usable once per day. It comes with the Concentrate, Fortune, Lashunta, and Mental traits, and it has a trigger of you fail a will saving throw against a mental effect. The feat reads, you center your thoughts and focus your mind, shaking off emotional turmoil and harmful mental intrusion. Reroll the triggering saving throw and use the better result. So let's just go ahead and be honest here. This is a potent feat and one that I like. If I enjoyed the Kasatha feat that gives you the opportunity to reroll a reflex saving throw, then I am definitely going to enjoy a feat that allows you to reroll a will saving throw. Will saving throws can cover some of the most crippling effects inside of the game. You typically do not want to fail a will saving throw, so this is an ability that's going to come up. It's going to be useful. I like this one. Next up, we have Commanding Pheromones. So this is another first level feat playing around with the idea of pheromones. You can leverage your Commanding Pheromones to soothe ill will and take the edge off of your threats, turning your attempts at coercion into acts of leadership. When you coerce a creature, if your target would become unfriendly, and they aren't already unfriendly or hostile, they become indifferent instead. So kind of like Alluring Pheromones modifies Diplomacy, Commanding Pheromones is going to modify Coerce, which is a subsection of the rules under Intimidation. So functionally what this means is Commanding Pheromones covers about half of a skill, where Alluring Pheromones covers almost all of a skill, but the niche case for Alluring Pheromones is a lot less common. So in choosing between these two, you're choosing between Diplomacy and Intimidation, and you're trying to choose whether you want to modify the effects of one section of Intimidation, or whether you want to modify most versions of Diplomacy, but only in the niche of when your pheromones would apply. Narratively, I like both of these, but it's arguable which one is going to come up more. I feel like the kinds of characters that would make use of Commanding Pheromones are going to get more regular use of those pheromones than the sort of characters that would be playing off Alluring Pheromones. Of the two, I think Commanding Pheromones is probably the better choice in its niche, but it's kind of hard to judge exactly how these two would play out. Next up, we have the feat Distant Telepath, and this has the prerequisite of limited telepathy. Whether through training or innate talent, you've expanded the range at which you can telepathically communicate, increase the range of your limited telepathy by 15 feet. And it comes with a special note: you can select this feat more than once to further increase the range of your telepathy ability. This is just strictly useful, and I like it. Next up, we have our typical Ancestry lore feat with Lashunta lore. This is going to give you training in Occultism and Society, and the additional lore general feat for Lashunta lore. We've seen feats like this before, and it follows that format. Our final first level Ancestry feat option is called Psychic Talent, and this is going to allow us to choose one cantrip from the Occult spell list. You can cast this cantrip as an Occult innate spell, and it is heightened to a spell rank equal to half your level, rounded up. This is a pretty typical Ancestry feat. We've seen a lot like this. It gives you access to a cantrip, though you will note it doesn't give you the ability to trade it out. We've seen several options throughout the series where you can access a cantrip and then trade it out in one way or another, but Psychic Talent just gives you access, doesn't give you the ability to trade it out. That's a little bit of a bummer given the other patterns we've seen, but still, most people aren't going to complain about having an extra cantrip that they can use. Looking at the Lashunta Ancestry feats as a whole, I really like Alluring Pheromones, Center Thoughts, Commanding Pheromones, and Distant Telepath. I think that one's pretty good too. However, the feat package overall for the Lashunta is a little bit disappointing to me. A lot of the abilities, like the pheromones, seem very niche, and some of the abilities, like Psychic Talent, don't seem to be on par with other abilities that we've seen throughout this series. And when you take the fact that Lashunta only have 3 heritages, and then their first level Ancestry feat options aren't the most compelling, unfortunately I feel like the Lashunta aren't sold very well in the Starfinder 2e playtest. And I would say that in the final version of Starfinder 2e, that I hope Paizo gives the Lashunta just a little bit more, because I feel like compared to some of the other Ancestries, they just don't stand out as much. Here's a quick glance at some of the higher level Lashunta Ancestry feats if you want to read over those. But now what I would like to do is move on to a new Versatile Heritage, and the last option that we will be covering in this series. That is, of course, the Prismeni. Prismenis are suffused with the energy of the Drift, a recently discovered hyperspace plane, and are spiritual kin to the Spectra who call that plane home. Wherever they go and whatever they do, they carry a fragment of the Drift inside of them, and they can access that plane and its power through this internal connection. I love this artwork. I'm just gonna go on the record as saying I absolutely love this artwork, and this alone really sells the Prismeni to me. By the way, there is some lore on this page about an event that occurred in Starfinder called the Drift Crisis, and how the Prismeni relate to the Drift and relate to that event of the Drift Crisis. I don't want to dig into all of that lore, but it's definitely something that is worth checking out. Let's go ahead and talk about what the Prismeni are, as they are a versatile heritage, which means they're a little bit different from the ancestries that we've already been talking about. Here we have our introduction page. It tells us some things that might be true about us or that other people automatically assume about us. It gives a little bit of a physical description. And I do want to point out the very last sentence of the physical description, because I think this is a storytelling note worth leaning into. While within the Drift, Prismenis come alive. Their hair, flesh, and eyes become more colorful and vibrant, their countenance more expressive, and their actions more confident. I really like that note, and I think that's something just to keep in mind if you're interested in playing this versatile heritage. You get a discussion of their society, their beliefs, popular edicts and anathema, and then you get the rules for the actual Prismeni heritage. So, what is the Prismeni heritage? Now, if you've seen the first video in this series, we previously talked about the Borai, which are a kind of versatile heritage that exist inside of Starfinder 2e. Prismeni are also an example of a versatile heritage, and a versatile heritage is basically a heritage that can be applied to any ancestry. So if you think about when we were discussing the androids and the humans and the Kasathas and the Sirren, all of the different ancestry options that you have inside of Starfinder 2e, each of those ancestries came with a list of heritages that they could select. Well, a versatile heritage is a heritage that kind of gets added to the list for every ancestry. So if you're playing a human, you have the normal human heritage options, and then you could also choose Prismeni as a heritage instead of one of the normal options that is listed. If you choose the Prismeni heritage, these are the effects of that choice. You have an innate connection to the Drift. You gain the Prismeni trait in addition to the traits from your ancestry. While in the Drift, you can automatically pinpoint the location of drift beacons, drift drives, drift engines, and other drift-related technology within a 100-mile radius. If you're piloting a starship that doesn't have a drift engine, you can serve as a connection between the Drift and that starship. This is a 1-minute activity that has the concentrate trait, and it allows the starship you're piloting to enter or exit the Drift. Once within the Drift, the starship travels via conventional thrusters as normal. When you get a critical failure on a piloting check to navigate or plot a course through the Drift, you get a failure instead. You can choose Prismeni feats and feats from your ancestry whenever you gain an ancestry feat. So here's where we get to talk about what may be one of the least applicable mechanical abilities ever that I still absolutely love. The function of the Prismeni heritage is you are connected to the Drift, and if you happen to be piloting a ship that doesn't have a drift drive, your ship can still enter and exit the Drift. Now, I do realize there are some thematic differences between the Drift and hyperspace and the other faster-than-light travel that you see in various sci-fi franchises, but to just oversimplify the Prismeni for a moment, this heritage turns you into a hyperspace engine for your ship. That is ridiculously awesome, and I love it. From an entirely practical standpoint, this is very unlikely to come up, because the reality is, if you're in a situation where you want to use the drift to travel great distances, you're probably already going to be on a ship that is designed to travel those distances and as such has a drift engine on board. And conversely, if you're in a ship that doesn't have a drift engine, you're almost certainly going to be in a situation where you're not trying to go that far. I feel like this is not likely to come up very often, but I still love the flavor of this, and it's absolutely amazing. The ability to avoid a critical failure on a piloting check to navigate or plot a course through the drift, that actually feels like it will come up in a game and be useful, so that is worth having. But from a pure flavor perspective, I love what the Prismeni Heritage does, even if I know it's probably never getting used. Now, since the Prismeni is a versatile heritage, that does mean that the Prismeni is going to come with a special set of first level ancestry feats that are known as Lineage feats. You do not have to take a Lineage feat if you choose to play a Prismeni. These are optional, but if you want to take one of these, you would take them at first level to kind of designate what sort of Prismeni that you are. In particular, there are 3 lineage options for the Prismeni: Drift Touch, Spectra Soul, and Triune's Chosen. Up first we have Drift Touch, which is going to give us a special action usable once per day with the Concentrate, Light, Lineage, and Prismeni traits. It reads, "You were born in the Drift, and now, even after leaving, the plane is always a part of you. With a thought, you seize a fragment of the Drift and temporarily transplant it onto the battlefield as an intangible barrier of colorful light. This shimmering field appears within 30 feet and is straight and vertical, stretching up to 10 feet long and 10 feet high. The barrier grants concealment to creatures targeted through it, and it sheds colorful bright light for 10 feet on each side and dim light for the next 10 feet. You can ignore any concealment granted by the barrier. The barrier lasts for 5 rounds. At 13th level, the barrier instead grants standard cover." Now, anyone who's played Pathfinder 2e knows that the ability to throw concealment out onto the battlefield once per day is definitely something that's going to be useful. So the Drift Touch Lineage giving you the ability to throw some dazzling colors out into the battlefield, it's definitely going to have its use cases, but I want to point out something very important in this feat. Down near the end, you can ignore any concealment granted by the barrier. Normally in Pathfinder 2e and Starfinder 2e, if something gives concealment, that concealment goes both ways. So normally if you have concealment from your enemies that might be shooting at you, then your enemies would also have concealment when you shoot at them. With this ability, you have concealment from your enemies, but they don't have concealment from you. That is a really, really nice effect, and in a game that has a ranged combat meta, like the designers of Starfinder 2e have talked about, I think the Drift Touch Prismeni ability here is going to be very strong. I could see some storytellers getting a little bit annoyed with how practical this ability ends up being. I'm curious to see if that plays out in actual playtesting, but I suspect that this is one of the stronger options in this game. Next up, we have the Spectra Soul. You have a close connection to the Spectra and became a Prismeni due to their presence or interference. You can communicate mentally with Spectra and with intelligent constructs with the tech trait within 30 feet. You don't need to share a language to communicate with such creatures in this way. This doesn't give you any special access to their thoughts and communicates no more information than normal speech would. So this is basically another example of the limited telepathy or android shortwave ability that we've seen. This is another one of those communication abilities that Paizo likes to pass out. That is exactly what the Spectra Soul Lineage is doing here. The utility is probably going to vary based on how common Spectra are inside your game, but I do like the fact that it includes intelligent constructs with the tech trait, so that hopefully will come up often enough that this ability still feels reasonably useful. Finally, we have the Lineage feat Triune's Chosen. Triune chose you to become a Prismeni. You hold the All Code and its blessings close in your heart and cherish the knowledge and skill it has imparted upon you. You become trained in religion and Triune lore, you gain access to the Pulse Gauntlet, and for purposes of determining your proficiency, the Pulse Gauntlet is a simple weapon. Whenever you gain a class feature that grants you expert or greater proficiency in certain weapons, you also gain that proficiency in the Pulse Gauntlet. So Triune's Chosen is a little bit of an interesting heritage. It's not quite one of your Ancestry lore feats, and it's not quite one of your weapon familiarity feats. It's got a little bit of both mixed in there, but if you're playing a character that would be interested especially in the Pulse Gauntlet weapon, this could be a good choice for you. Now, taking a look at the different lineage options, Spectre Soul and Triune's Chosen are decent and I think will work for certain characters, but they're not super strong choices. However, as I've said, I think the Drift Touch action is going to be incredibly powerful, and I absolutely love that one. Now, beyond lineage feats, Prismeni are also going to come with just first level ancestry feats that they can take normally, so now I want to dig into those. First up, we have Data Jockey. Like Spectra, you can easily send data to other technological devices. You can cast the Implant Data cantrip as a divine innate spell at will. A cantrip is heightened to a spell rank equal to half your level rounded up. Implant Data is a cantrip that basically says you target a particular device, and the next time someone loads up that device, you determine the first thing they see when that device loads up, and you'd better believe my Prismeni is rickrolling the daylights out of everyone with this ability if I ever get to play one of these. This is a little bit situational, but in practical terms, this could allow you to send messages or relay information to certain people. There are some tactical use cases for this cantrip, but mostly I feel like this feat is just leaning into some flavor rather than hardcore mechanics. Up next, we have a feat called Living Battery, and it is worth noting Living Battery has the concentration trait. Your body produces an overabundance of electrical energy which you can emit as a blast of lightning or to power technological devices. You can cast the Electric Arc cantrip as a divine innate spell at will. A cantrip is heightened to a spell rank equal to half your level rounded up. When you cast Electric Arc, the spell's target becomes one or two creatures or tech items in any combination. If you target a tech item, that item isn't damaged, instead it gains one of the following benefits. If the item is a battery, it regains 2 charges per spell rank. If the item has a usage and is powered by a battery, the item's usage is reduced to 0 for 1 round per spell rank. And if the item needs a continuous external power source, such as an item plugged into an electrical outlet or power grid, and is currently off or lacking a power source, then it turns the item on for 1 round per spell rank. So, Living Battery is going to give you the ability to use the Electric Arc cantrip, which is commonly considered to be one of the best offensive cantrips in Pathfinder 2e, and I suspect it will continue to be a pretty prominent spell in Starfinder 2e as well. It's going to give you what is already a really solid cantrip, and then it's going to give you some utility usage for that cantrip in charging up different technological items. Living Battery is great, and I absolutely love this feat. I think this is a very solid choice. Next up, we have Prismeni Lore, which is going to be our Ancestry Lore feat. It's going to give us training in piloting itself, and then it's going to give us the additional Lore General feat for Prismeni Lore. And then our final first level feat option is called Tech Familiarity. You have an intuitive understanding of computers, machines, and other technological devices. You become trained in computers and crafting, and if you would automatically become trained in one of these skills, you instead become trained in a skill of your choice. So essentially, Tech Familiarity is a slightly weaker but alternative version of the Ancestry Lore feat that we previously discussed, but you don't get the additional Lore General feat if you take Tech Familiarity. This reminds me of some of the choices we talked about for the Ysoki in the first video in this series, and if I remember correctly, I believe the Ysoki option here was actually stronger, so I'm a little bit thrown off for the design of the Tech Familiarity feat. I'm not going to say it's not useful, but compared to Prismeni Lore, it kind of feels like this feat is never going to see any usage. Here's a quick glance at some of the higher level Prismeni feats that you can have access to. So if you want, take a moment and pause the video so you can read over those. But honestly, when it comes to the Prismeni, they're not going to have as many options as a normal Ancestry, and that's because Prismeni is going to stack on top of an Ancestry as your heritage choice. So anytime you see a Versatile Heritage, remember that they're not going to have as many options as a traditional Ancestry would, but that's kind of part of the design. A Versatile Heritage is intended to merge with your Ancestry choice and give you options that you can select under your Ancestry or under the Versatile Heritage, depending on what best suits your character concept. Overall, I really love the Prismeni. This is actually one of my favorite options that Paizo's presented in terms of Ancestry or Heritage choices in this game. I think it's very creative, and again, I don't think you'll ever actually use it, but just the fact that your character can function as a drift drive for a ship if it doesn't have one, that is so cool, and I absolutely love it. I'm not as hyped for the Prismeni as I am for Skittermanders, because we all know that I am way too obsessed with Skittermanders, and no one's ever going to replace them as my favorite in this game. But the Prismeni are an incredible concept, and Prismeni Skittermander is a 100% legal character that I could totally play one day, so who's to say I can't have both? Anyways, that brings us to an end of our discussion of the different Ancestry and Versatile Heritage options in Starfinder 2e. This has been 3 incredibly long videos on this subject. We've covered a ton of content, and we haven't actually seen every single option presented in the playtest. Paizo is going really hard with a lot of these Ancestries, and I am very impressed with a lot of what Paizo is bringing to the table. Again, out of everything we've seen, I feel like the Lashunta probably are the weakest option so far, but none of the options that Paizo presented feel terrible. I think all of them have at least some narrative and mechanical hooks that players can find interesting, but as with the other videos, the time has come to turn the conversation over to you. What are your thoughts about the Ancestries that we discussed in today's video? The Barathus, the Kasathas, the Lashuntas, and the new Prismeni Versatile Heritage. Do you have a favorite from one of these options? Or did anything that we discussed today inspire a possible character build for you? Feel free to jump down to the comments section and let me know. And let me know if there's something in one of these Ancestries that you feel is missing, or that you would like to see Paizo address between now and the ultimate publication of Starfinder 2nd Edition. Be sure to share that in the comments section as well. Going forward for my coverage of the Starfinder 2e playtest, I do have some more content that I'm hoping to cover for this game. I am very hyped for this playtest, and I do really want to see the best version of this game be put out. I have loved Starfinder for a long time, and I am very excited with a lot of the things that Paizo is doing here. Towards the end of this year, I am hoping to do at least 1 or 2 videos covering my own experience doing the Starfinder 2e playtest here in my home table. So definitely be on the lookout for that. And along the way, there are a few other pieces of content for the playtest that I do want to spend some time discussing. However, I will say there is so much content to this playtest that I couldn't possibly cover all of it between now and the end of the playtest period. So if there's something about the Starfinder playtest that you are particularly interested in, definitely let me know, and I will try to work that into the content that I cover on this channel. Anyways, I know that this series has covered a lot of content, and I know that this video has been quite long. So before I leave, please remember to do all of that stuff that helps to support the channel. Like, share, and subscribe. Check out my free Discord, my Patreon. All of those links are in the video description. And don't forget that the link to the Starfinder 2e playtest is in the video description as well. Please remember to do all of that stuff. It really does mean the world to me. But as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for being part of the conversation. Have a wonderful day.